I love vampires, so let's talk about vampire movies. Power, immortality, seduction, addiction, lust, belief, good versus evil, vampire horror has been with us for over a century, and thankfully it's not going away anytime soon. Just in a couple of days, Nosferatu, Robert Eggers' gorgeous reimagining of Murnau's classic, is going to hit theaters, and I can't wait for you to see it. Which means there's no better time than now to take a look at some of the best films the genre has to offer, and for me to talk about my top 10 absolute favorites. So here are top 10 amazing vampire movies that I think you simply have to watch. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions because there are a few classics that I really admire, and not mentioning them would be a crime. Any horror fan, and particularly vampire fans, should watch these at least once, even though to a modern audience, they will feel pretty dated and very of their time. First up, of course, Murnau's Nosferatu, the unofficial and unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's an iconic silent classic and a stunning example of German expressionism that had a massive influence on the horror genre and continues inspiring films to this day with its unforgettable cinematography and atmosphere. Plus, who could ever forget this take on what a vampire looks like? Todd Browning's Dracula, starring the legendary Bela Lugosi, offers a more familiar version of the story, and its old-school theatricality actually works in its favor. Beyond the gorgeous setting and the dark, moody atmosphere, there is this cohesive, timeless quality to this film that really captured the feel of the novel for me. Bela Lugosi is, of course, unforgettable here, but also Dwight Frye as Renfield is something else. But my favorite out of the honorable mentions is Dreyer's Vampyre. It's an incredibly haunting, mysterious, and eerie film about a student of the occult who encounters all kinds of supernatural things in a village outside of Paris. It also features my favorite use of shadows I've ever seen in a movie. It's such a big part of Vampyre that it feels as if there is a separate shadow world here. It's a beautifully ominous piece of classic horror cinema. But with that, let's get into my actual top 10 of these deliciously dark films, and I can't wait to see your favorites in the comments below. I'm always looking for more vampire movies to watch. And while you're getting nice and comfortable for this list, I'm going to do the same, which means I need a hot beverage, and if you know me, you know it's going to be coffee, and of course, it's from today's wonderful sponsor, Trade Coffee. The holidays are almost here, and I know some of you are still scrambling for that last-minute gift that doesn't actually feel last minute. Well, with Trade, you can easily send a personalized coffee subscription, and I guarantee that the coffee drinkers in your life are going to love it. Even though I've been a subscriber for a while, I still get so excited when I get a new package from Trade because I can't wait to try the coffee that's inside. I have my favorite blends that I order all the time, but I've been feeling pretty adventurous lately because I know that with Trade, my coffee is always freshly roasted, curated specifically for me, and full of flavor and aroma. A coffee subscription is something your loved ones will be able to appreciate every day and look forward to every time they reach for a fresh cup of coffee. It's such an easy yet very personal gift. All you need to do is pick a subscription length, enter their email, and let Trade deliver delicious coffee that's perfectly matched to their taste straight to their door. Now listen, Trade is offering their best savings of the year on gift subscriptions right now, so don't miss out and head over to drinktrade.com/impressionblend to send a personalized subscription in minutes. Or if you'd like to treat yourself this holiday season, you can also head to drinktrade.com/impressionblend to get a free bag of coffee with any new subscription. So cross those final gifts off your list or try it for yourself and take your at-home coffee experience to the next level. And thank you so much to Trade Coffee for sponsoring this video. But let's get back to the vampires, and I'm not going to lie, I found this top 10 very difficult to rank. I love all of these movies so much, but we have to start somewhere, so opening this list is Werner Herzog's Nosferatu the Vampyre, which is essentially a remake of the 1922 film I mentioned earlier. Blending a readaptation of Bram Stoker's novel with the visual elements of Murnau's Nosferatu, this film is easily one of the best vampire classics, but also one of the best takes on Dracula in particular. Jonathan Harker is sent to Count Dracula's castle to sell him a house, but the ancient vampire becomes obsessed with Lucy, Jonathan's wife, after seeing a photo of her, and sets out to pursue her, bringing plague and death to their German town. I mean, this movie features 11,000 rats, which is absolutely insane. Talk about a plague. This particular version of the story really leans into the loneliness of Dracula's immortal existence and the pain of living without love. It's a slower, more contemplative film that's beautifully eerie and atmospheric, often feeling poetic. There are so many gorgeous lingering shots, whether they're close-ups focusing on emotions or the moody, majestic landscapes. The cinematography in general is gorgeous, and often this film looks like a painting. Klaus Kinski brings some much-needed humanity to Dracula's character, and Isabelle Adjani is probably the most perfect Lucy I've ever seen. Both of them are very charismatic and completely unforgettable. Nosferatu the Vampyre is a beautiful classic that deserves to be talked about a lot more. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is easily one of the most unique vampire films I've ever seen. Described as an Iranian vampire western, which is already an intriguing concept, the movie feels like a spellbinding, timeless ghost story. In the Iranian ghost town of Bad City, a worn-down place that's full of death and loneliness, a skateboarding, lonesome vampire stalks criminals and men who hurt women. Also, there's a cat. A wonderful, glorious cat, and that's always a plus in my book. This one is definitely a slow burn, but every time I watch A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, it somehow hypnotizes me. There is no other way of describing it. There is this dreamlike quality to this film. It's moody, the location feels like its own character, the black and white cinematography is so striking and so memorable, the soundtrack is amazing, and the neo-western feel of this vampire vigilante story is an unexpectedly perfect match. Sheila Vand is magnetic as the lead, known simply as the girl, and you cannot take your eyes off her enigmatic character. I will say, this movie might be a bit too artsy for some, but it's unlike anything else within the genre, which to me makes it a must-watch. And also, this is my list, and it's one of my favorites. Now listen, vampires have always been some level of horny, and the first truly horny film on this list is Park Chan-wook's very appropriately titled Thirst. Definitely another unique take on the genre that's equal parts creepy, dramatic, kinky, but also unexpectedly occasionally funny. A priest volunteers for an experimental procedure in hopes of finding a cure for a deadly virus, and a mysterious blood transfusion leaves him torn between faith, bloodlust, and lust for a friend's wife. It's a story focused on the internal conflict of sexuality, instinct, and morality, led by one of Song Kang-ho's best performances of his entire career. I feel like telling you that this is a quirky and kinky vampire priest movie from Park Chan-wook should be enough to pique your interest, because how could you possibly not be at least curious? But I also feel like I have to point out how gorgeous this film looks. It has so much style, it has such a distinct look, and its use of color and lighting complements the storytelling perfectly. Just like the rest of the director's work, Thirst dives deep into human nature, much more interested in exploring shades of gray rather than drawing clear lines between good and evil. The characters are layered, the relationships are messy, the questions are intriguing, intriguing, and that's exactly what I love to see. More than 15 years later, the film still feels fresh and unexpected as it combines bloodthirsty horror, weird romance, guilt, shame, self-discovery, and dark comedy. Alright, since we're getting spicy, it's time to talk about the gorgeously maximalist and definitely very horny Bram Stoker's Dracula. This movie goes all out in every way. It's bold, weird, beautiful, and completely unforgettable. Set in 19th century England, this is one of the most faithful adaptations of the novel. Here, Count Dracula travels to London and meets Mina Harker, a young woman who appears as the reincarnation of his lost love. Vampire shenanigans ensues. This is an epic vampire film in every way. The ambitious presentation of the story, the luscious cinematography, the production design, the costumes that are extraordinary, the eternal love of it all. Gary Oldman's performance as Dracula that's about as extra as possible. Francis Ford Coppola goes all out here, and it's no wonder the movie initially received mixed reviews. It's a lot, no matter how you look at it. It's kind of an insane film, but that's also why I love it. Is Keanu's accent and his performance, if I'm being honest, as bad as people say it is? Yes, but half of the cast has ridiculous accents, even though this is an excellent all-star cast. And at that point, it just feels like the movie is in its own universe. Plus, the breathtaking visuals and the monumental drama of it all, the boldness and the style easily outweigh the negatives here. Of course, this list couldn't possibly be complete without another unforgettable 90s vampire classic, Interview with a Vampire. I was obsessed with this movie when I was a teenager, and I was a little bit scared to rewatch it, but turns out it holds up, and it is just as stunning as I remembered. Based on the popular Anne Rice novel, the story is about an old vampire, Lestat, who turns a desperate and heartbroken man, Louis, into a vampire in the late 1700s. The film chronicles their time together through the years, filled with love, betrayal, loneliness, and dark hunger, and all of this is framed by a present-day interview. First of all, talk about the perfect cast. Tom Cruise, in easily one of the best roles of his career, Brad Pitt, Christian Slater, I mean, already, Be Still My Heart, but then on top of that, Kirsten Dunst and Antonio Banderas. And with all of that, the story literally spans centuries with a complicated, toxic relationship at its center, and once again, production design and costumes to die for. I adore this movie, and I really miss the days when big movie stars would take chances on movies like this. That kind of thing just doesn't happen anymore. Undeniably beautiful and deliciously overly dramatic. Just what a vampire period piece should be. Only Lovers Left Alive was my first Jim Jarmusch film, believe it or not, and what an introduction to a filmmaker this was. I immediately fell in love with this movie. Sometimes you're just on the same wavelength with a film, and this was one of those for me. Set in Detroit, the movie is about a depressed musician, Adam, who reunites with his lover, Eve. The two were married for centuries and now are living half a world apart, but their reunion becomes complicated because of the arrival of Eve's impulsive and unpredictable younger sister. Here's the thing about this movie. Beyond it looking as stunning as it does and me wishing I had Eve's wardrobe, Only Lovers Left Alive is about being disillusioned with humanity and yet still finding the will to go on. I'm sure most of us have felt like Adam at some point, watching people shuffle around like zombies as the world around us feels like it's decaying, falling apart, and all you can do is lose yourself in nostalgia. But what will be the spark that shakes you awake, and will you be willing to accept it. The movie is a beautifully made meditation on life, stagnation, and inspiration, wrapped in music and exquisite, out-of-this-world filmmaking style. Also, I'm pretty sure Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston actually are vampires because they could not have been more perfect here. For my next favorite, let's time travel back to the 80s to the movie where it all began for me. Fright Night. This was the first vampire movie I rented. I was in my early teens and I instantly fell in love with the genre and with the 80s. Suburban horror is always a fun time, and this time a vampire moves into the neighborhood. But of course, when Charlie, a high school student, accidentally discovers the true and creepy nature of Jerry Dandridge, his charming and enigmatic new neighbor, no one is willing to believe him. Fright Night is an absolute gem from the 80s that is always a delight to revisit. It's a mix between a classic Dracula-type vampire story and teen suburban horror with a bit of Rear Window in there as well that results in one of the best horror films of that decade. It's effective in every way. It's fun, it's spooky, it's sexy, some of it is surprisingly emotional, it has memorable characters, it has a great sense of humor, fantastic practical effects because this movie actually gets unexpectedly gruesome, and overall it just holds up really well despite being almost 40 years old. One of those movies that makes you nostalgic for a time you didn't actually experience. Plus, Chris Sarandon is one of the all-time best vampire castings you'll ever see, and his sweater game is exceptional. All right, this next one might surprise some of you, but we have to talk about Dr. Sleep. I know you're probably wondering what the sequel to The Shining is doing on this list, but hear me out on this one because soul-sucking vampires are still vampires. Set over 3 decades after The Shining, the story focuses on Dan Torrance, a man with psychic abilities he's trying to suppress and a drinking problem as he is still struggling with his childhood trauma caused by the horrors at the Overlook Hotel. The vampires here are a group of people known as the True Knot, vampires who feed on the essence of the people with the shine. Now, I am specifically talking about the director's cut in this case because I wasn't as impressed by the theatrical version, but the director's cut really changed my mind, making Dr. Sleep into one of my favorite horror films and one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations. The longer runtime just gives this movie time to breathe and really brings the story together. Rebecca Ferguson, as our vampire leader here, Rose the Hat, is absolutely fantastic, and even though the cast in general is very strong, she is the one who makes this movie with her hypnotic presence, along with Mike Flanagan's masterful direction. He just knows how to capture the right atmosphere for supernatural, character-driven horror, which feels very King, and once again, I love a unique take on vampires, which this movie definitely is. Nosferatu, of course. I mentioned in my review that this is one of the best vampire movies ever made, and it's this high on my list because I really did love it this much. It's a gorgeous film that absolutely floored me, and while I usually stay away from statements like this after just one viewing, but there is no way around it, this was an instant favorite. We're back to the classic vampire narrative with another take on Nosferatu, and this time a dark, gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and an ancient vampire infatuated with her, leaving all kinds of horror and chaos behind him. Succumb to the darkness, they said, and I definitely did because I am obsessed with this movie. I do have a full review on my channel talking about why I loved it so much and how Robert Eggers nailed every single aspect of this film, but in short, Nosferatu is a masterpiece of gothic horror, and I loved everything about it. it from its opening sequence to the very last shot. It's eerie and brooding, ominous and intense, dark, seductive, haunting, and the cinematography is beyond gorgeous. Lily Rose Depp gives it her all as Ellen. I'm pretty sure she's actually possessed in this film. Bill Skarsgård is also fantastic and truly unrecognizable, and everything about this movie just feels right. Every element of the production working together to create this unforgettable gem of cinematic horror. But my favorite vampire film, the one I will never get tired of recommending, is still Let the Right One In. A Swedish masterpiece that is an absolute must-watch even if you're not that into vampires, and an icy, dark, modern fairy tale that is simply stunning. Based on the excellent 2004 novel of the same name, the story is about Oscar, a 12-year-old boy living with his mother, and Ellie, who is also 12, but she has been 12 for centuries. The two become friends, but very soon, Oscar begins to understand that Ellie is no ordinary girl, and behind her mysterious and moody personality is a lonely, ancient vampire. Let the Right One In is a beautifully nuanced, subtle coming-of-age story. It's about alienation, loneliness, and friendship. It's about the concepts of good and evil, and it is one of the best vampire stories ever told. Obviously, it's my favorite. I do have a very old review of this movie back from the early days of my channel, so watch at your own risk, but I stand by everything I said in this video. I love the visual storytelling here. I love how beautiful, quiet, and cold everything looks, and I love when it suddenly doesn't. I love what this film has to say about bullying and empathy and how it challenges the way we perceive these things. Winter horror at its best, vampire horror at its best, coming-of-age horror at its best. This is one of those rare, perfect movies I would recommend to everyone. But what are some of your favorite vampire movies? Let me know in the comments, and for more horror recommendations, check out one of these videos next.